Balearic Parliament, Irache Garcia, leader of the Progressive Alliance of Socialists and Democrats Parliamentary Group, Javier Moreno, also from the European Progressive Alliance, and all the members of trade unions who are going to be taking part in the panels, and all our friends who are here to attend this event, and also the ones who are following us through streaming. So welcome to everybody. Welcome and thank you for coming to this meeting about a more fair Europe for our youth. The Progressive Alliance of Socialists and Democrats in the European Parliament organizes these meetings, which are part of the Framework Conference for the Future of Europe. This is a discussion forum to explore what can be done for the future of Europe and what the young people can do for the future of Europe. Quality jobs, combating poverty, climate emergency, all the different issues that concern the European society and also particularly young Europeans. This is why this event is so important, because we need solutions. And as Jürgen Habermas would say, who's a German philosopher who's very close to progressive ideas, civil society must propose solutions to problems. And this needs to be discussed within the public sphere. And if they can come up with adequate proposals, they need to be attended to by policymakers. They all form part of the civil society as other entities, which are also present here with their representatives, as RUGE, which is the UGT, Spanish Trade Union Youth, Generation Climate Europe, Save the Children, and the Youth European Forum. So these are all the people who we're going to be hearing along the afternoon. There will be two panels, one which will be based on quality jobs and affordable housing for our youth, and the second panel will deal with climate emergency and the eradication of child and youth poverty. We will have speakers from Croatia, Finland, Spain, and Austria. We will also hear the Minister of Transport and Urban Mobility, and also a greeting from the Spanish government Foreign Affairs Minister. Now we're going to take a family photograph as we are listening to the European anthem. So I would like to call to the stage Ms. Francina Armengol, Ms. Irache, and Javier Moreno. Thank you.
este acto.
We're going to open this event with the interventions of Irache Garcia, leader of the Socialists and Democrats group at the European Parliament, Javier Moreno, head of the Spanish delegation in the European Parliament, and Francina Armengol, president of the Balearic Islands government, as well as Secretary General of the Socialist Party of the Balearic Islands. Good afternoon. friends, colleagues. It's a pleasure being here in Palma, and especially in such a important moment as it is this one for us all, and trying to contribute something to this future of Europe, because Europe will not have a future if we cannot get involved and also become leading roles in this process. As you know, about a year ago, we started this conference on the future of Europe back at the European institutions, and the Socialist and Democrat group, we have wanted to follow this, the more formal conferences. We have wanted to do follow-ups with this smaller format and more casual, we could say, meetings. We're coming out of the pandemic, and now we are in the middle of a war situation. What this has shown us is the need we have to ensure more and better Europe. Because when we're united, we're stronger. And when we're united, we are better able to respond to the global challenges we are facing. In this debate process, we have managed to bring to the same table institutions, MPs, civil society, NGOs, individuals who also have shown their disposition to be part of these meetings. We have tried to listen and see what ideas came out of the citizens in terms of building a better Europe. And I must say that this exercise was very useful and rewarding for me, because we have been able to see that the citizens' concerns are very much aligned with what we have been putting out for quite some time already. What happens is that we go into these dynamics and we start working, but then you stop and you think, is this really what citizens want? So the Future of Europe conference has shown us that what we have been discussing from the European Social Democrats is also what the European citizens are putting forward. I have also been in the commissions for social and justice and social growth, and citizens have also told us that they want a more social Europe. They want us to move forward with policies to fight childhood poverty, that we have to work in order to ensure quality jobs and decent salaries. There's also a problem with housing that Europe needs to solve. And we've also heard that we need to get a more sustainable economic growth. We cannot continue to grow economically at the expense of destroying the planet. So with all these issues that citizens came up with at these different meetings, and also what we will be able to hear today here from you, they are showing us the right path. And now we are facing the hardest task, which is bringing it into reality. And I say it's hard because we are in a moment of a lot of uncertainty. This war has shown us the worst phase of all those who are right now wanting to attack the European Union fundamental values. Some of them have been doing it for quite some time already, trying to destabilize the EU, supporting populist forces or extreme right forces, xenophobic forces who are making their way forward in the hate speech. I think there is a very important activity that we need to do as a society, which is being able to understand how we got here and thanking the past generations who made possible for us to have all the rights we now enjoy. But we also have to be aware that these rights are not guaranteed forever. If today women can be involved in politics or come into the labor market, it's only because many women before us have worked towards that. But nowadays there is a far-right and populist force in Europe that wants to bring us back to that dark corner in history where we should have never been. So we need to be more aware than ever that Europe is something that's being built day after day, and we need to commit to the values of democracy, freedom, fundamental rights, and not allowing the fundamental principle of a diverse Europe to be attacked. And we have to put a face on people's names. We have to do it understanding that we need to stand by those who need it most, the most vulnerable among us. And also we have to carry out an exercise of dignifying the political activity, because this will involve being able to be where we need to be. And from the left, people in the left wing have come into politics to solve people's problems. In these difficult moments, we need to be bigger than ourselves and become stronger, and being confident that what we are advocating for is what we need in order to have a more equalitarian, feminist, and just society. We have a lot of work ahead of us, and I want to thank you all for being here. Also thanking all the speakers. Andres, I'm delighted that you're going to be here today, as I am about all the other comrades who are going to be talking here today. And I think your presence here today, what it demonstrates is a commitment that you all have and that you respect, because I'm sure you would have better things to do than being here this afternoon, but you have decided to come here to contribute and to keep moving forward towards this more just and solidary Europe, this future of Europe that we will be able to build with all of you, all of us together. Thank you.
Buenas tardes a todas y a todos.
Good afternoon, everybody.
On the web streaming, and the panelists who are coming from all Europe to participate in this big event. Para mí es un placer compartir.
For me, it's a pleasure to be part of the opening of this event with two young presidents. One is the president of the Balearic government, Francina, and Irache, our head at the European Parliament. Why do I say this? Because I realize that all policies from the local level to the European level are completely linked. And what is being done here on the Balearic Islands will have repercussions in Europe, and what we do in the European Parliament will have repercussions on the Balearic Islands. But this is not a round or a meeting of presidents. The protagonists today are you, the young people, and basically we have come here to listen to you, to listen to your discussions, and then take these ideas into concrete actions. And I feel very much at home here, because whenever I am around young people, I also feel younger. Not that I feel old, I have a lot of accumulated youth. But it is a good time. And as I said, we're coming today to dialogue, to listen to you. And then at the end, with Alicia, we will see the conclusions. And I must say that I am very proud of having Alicia in the Spanish Socialist delegation at the European Parliament.
Por primera vez.
For the first time in the group's history, this is the largest delegation we've ever had. And Alicia, a woman, young, intelligent, hardworking, she deals with employment issues. And one example I want to give you about the struggle she's been leading in order to get the European Union where there isn't a single young person doing any non-remunerated internships. this is not what we want for our society. So this is why I'm so very much pleased to have you in our delegation. And I think if there is one person who embodies the future of Europe, that is you. Having said this, Pedro talked a bit about the program and the concerns and issues that we're going to be dealing with. This is not an easy time, we all know that. But I have a big flaw, which is that I was born an optimistic, and I trust humanity, I have confidence in humanity and young people. I have 3 children who are in your age. We criticize the European Union a lot, that it doesn't work properly, etc. But I can tell you that this is one of the places in the world where you can live the best life in the European Union. It's one of the best places to live in. It's a space of peace, democracy, freedom, and rights. But they need to be looked after. And I count on you. Because, as you can see, the far right, not only in Spain, but in every country, they're really rising up and they're trying to destroy the success of the European Union. And then we have, to boot, we still have Putin, who's also trying to destroy it. We're facing a difficult task. We're in a difficult time after the pandemic. Young people have suffered a lot. It's been a huge disturbance in their education, their work, which I have seen through my own children. And I think the European Union has been able to provide a quick and solidary response, and it has shown unity. As Irache was saying, when we organized this conference on the future of Europe, I am very proud that the Socialist and Democrat group of the European Parliament is part of this initiative, and we need to count on all of you, not only to talk about the future, but also about the present. And I think the best way to do it is that you get involved in politics, that you become active out on the street. Because I can see Vox, the far-right party in Spain, which are becoming more and more present out on the street. The other day I was in this main road in Madrid, and I could see a stall of Vox, and they were giving out brochures and flyers, and I thought, we're not even in any political campaign right now, and what are they doing here? So they are very present on the street, and that's one of our big challenges. Another big challenge is the inflation that we're suffering due to the war. And our government is trying to do everything they can so that the least favored people, the most vulnerable people, are not going to suffer too much from it. Our president, our party, and our government are showing an action that can be considered very important. And I don't want to talk too much. I want to listen to you. But the main thing is that everybody, not only in Spain, but in the rest of the world, and particularly in Europe, as the other day the president said in Davos, that our government only has one goal, which is making people's lives better. It doesn't matter how much noise the far right is doing, but we have to keep on trudging our way and continuing with the policies that our government has been implementing. For this task, I count on all of you, young people, so that we can move forward. So we're going to listen to you now, and then at the end, we'll go over the conclusions that we will draw together with Alicia. The most important thing of this conference is bringing all these proposals into reality. in the European Parliament, it might be easy because all we have to do is convince governments, but we will be together in this struggle. Thank you very much.
Buenas tardes, es un placer para mí.
Good afternoon. It really is a pleasure for me to share the opening of this conference together with Irache and Javier. Thank you for choosing Mallorca, Palma for this conference and the European Socialists to give us the opportunity to be part of this Future of Europe conference. I've always said that those things that you don't dream about and that you don't share, you will never be able to make reality. Good afternoon, everybody. Today is 3 years since the last elections.
It's the first. It's 3 years ago since the Socialist Party won the first elections ever in the Balearic Islands, and this allowed us to carry on with governing in the Balearic Islands and in the Parliament, and to have Alicia's 0 deputies. So we're happy that we can have this debate with a Euro deputy that is young and that is going to push for those policies that are so necessary for the Balearic Islands. She was saying earlier, Irache, that we all build politics from global to local, from local to global. And I've said many times that this land that is very European, open, diverse, a place where we have always received lots of people who come to visit, to then go, and we're an intrinsic part of all this, really. And I believe that lately, and maybe due to the unfortunate events that are taking place, but I think crises generate opportunity. And more than ever, we have felt proud of being European for obvious reasons, for the situation of the sanitary pandemic that has hurt us very much. But it has shown as well that we are a group, a European unity. We have managed to reconstruct the situations of countries from a more fair perspective. We've managed to get a vaccine. We managed to have confinement. All of this happened because Europe was born to protect those who are most vulnerable. Now we're living this a very unfair war between Putin and Ukraine, and we know that this has very negative consequences for all of European citizens, but that together we can fight to defend our rights, the social rights, the rights of people. And I think we have to be very proud for having this kind of debate here in Palma, because we really feel a part of it. And to do so from the perspective of youth and the European youth, which is no doubt those that can help the most for defining the Europe that we want to build between all of us. I'll give a few examples, but I'll go briefly because I think we need to give space for the different roundtables. But as I said, 3 years ago, we won the elections. It's been 7 years since we govern in this autonomous community, and therefore we have been able to bring about a progressive policy, key policies to support youth and the things that worry our youngsters. Here in the Balearic Islands, which is a great place, we have some problems, and one of them is that we are very fragile before climate change, and that's why we started our legislation with clear policies to tackle climate change and to protect the environment, to protect our islands. We have been leaders in Europe in some questions, like, for example, implementing the European directives. We advanced also in eliminating plastic residue. We are the first area in Europe that has a decree for protecting Posidonia. So protecting our ecosystem and marine systems is very important because it's part of our richness. And when I say that we are aware that we have to protect our territory, our landscape, our land, is because we want to have a living society with rights and guarantees. And this is linked to what the young people need. And we're saying, how can we help a young person to move out of their home, their parents' house, without great problems? So first of all, we need them to have good education, and we have invested in education, in ongoing training, in more university degrees, and make sure that what is on offer is equitative and accessible to all of them. And I'd like to thank really the groups of youths in the Balearic Island, because they are great in supporting our proposals. And for example, they asked to have less university taxes, and we managed. And this year we're going to lower them again. So we need good training for people to be capacitated to do their jobs. Bear in mind that due to the sanitary situation that we have been through, our GDP has gone down 20%. So this is important, you know, and Guardiola was saying the other day, and I see that the two secretaries are here as well. Without these two, without these two organizations fighting next to us, it would have not been possible without these two trade unions to reach what we have managed to reach. So we had an occupational plan of 620,000 euros, which is the most we have ever devoted to work or job policies. And the objective is to achieve complete unemployment. So we have, listen to what I'm saying, gone down 20% with our GBP, and we're already talking about getting rid of unemployment. So we have done in very little time a lot more than the right parties have done in a long time. And we have been lucky enough to have Sanchez as a president, because he has created so much. He has given support to our network of corporations and companies here in the Balearic Islands, but also in Spain. He got 120 million euros for supporting jobs in Spain. And we are working towards being sustainable, both financially and socially. And now we are going to add to this 620, 120 more for the youth. And I think this shows the will that we have as socialists. And this support is going to be given to those youngsters that are well qualified, and they're going to try and get a job, and they're told that they have no experience. So we're going to give them 15 months of work. We're going to incorporate 150 researchers in the University of the Balearic Islands. We're going to help youngsters who have abandoned their studies to come back to study. We have reduced the fact that youngsters leave school too early. We have fought this. 50% of those are going back. So we're doing a lot. Training and quality in work is essential. We have now also achieved that 8 of every 10 contracts are indefinite, because if you have a temporary job or if you have a long-term job, this changes when you're looking for a home. And we know in the Balearic Islands that we have a problem regarding housing, and we need a European policy that needs to understand that we cannot treat everybody the same, and there is nothing more unfair than treating equally those who are different. We are islands, European islands, and we need the European Union to take into consideration the fact that we are islands in with regards with all the policies, whether it is transport, mobility, or housing, because we have a limited space, and everybody wants to come and live here. So the problems that we're facing are a bit different and more complex. And in that sense, regarding housing, we are a government that has decided to make housing the fifth pillar of well-being. And you know that we make policies that are really enforcing all policies to make sure that housing is not going to be a problem. And a lot of the housing that we invest in goes to our youngsters, and we will carry on investing in these policies so that our youngsters can have a future in the Balearic Islands. We have a lot of talent. We want to keep it here, and we know that public policies have to be the ones that retain these people with us. And I won't say much more, but I do want to add that those European socialist youth from here, from the Balearic Islands, I want to say to you that we want to support you with ideas, with possibilities, with proposals, innovating proposals. For example, we are now working on a tourism law, which is quite innovating, that we explained to the European Commissioner of Work, because for the first time, the entrepreneurs in the tourism sector will have to implement measures to improve the work conditions of the workers here. For example, changing all of the beds in order to ensure that the ladies that do the cleaning and make the beds in the hotels don't have to suffer from kneeling or bending down to make the beds. So this is something, just as an example, that we are doing, and we are doing this through debate, through thinking, through dreaming, all together, the socialists of the Balearic Islands, and that we share with the European socialists. So I wish you all the best at the end of this day, and that Javier and Alicia can come up with fabulous conclusions, which will mean that we have shown proposals, hope, and support, which is what we all need. Thank you very much for your attention.
Muy bien, muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. And I wanted to remind you that we have Catalan, English, and Spanish available for you all. So the first panel we're going to look at is quality jobs and access to affordable housing for our youth. We're going to hear from Eduardo Magaldi, the General Secretary of the RUGE. We have Dara Turnbull, the Research Coordinator at Housing Europe, and we've got Victor Camino, who is the General Secretary of the Spanish Socialist Youths.
Bueno, Eduardo, tienes un micrófono.
Eduardo, your microphone is there. I think they're all switched on. Each of you can speak for 10 minutes. And if you agree with this, I will ask you a question at the start of your intervention. And of course, I think what you're going to speak about employment. And to start talking about that, we have to talk about the unemployment rate for youth in 2021, which was high in the European Union. But youth unemployment did drop over the same period. So therefore, we've seen a clear inequality between different countries. In certain countries, you've got 40% youth unemployment, whereas in countries such as the Netherlands, the unemployment rate is 6 to 9%. So what is this difference between different European countries due to? Thank you very much for inviting me here today and for organizing these events so that young people get to speak and make contributions. And we're not just going to speak about youths, but we're going to speak about every issue that affects society. And this is not true at all events, so I want to congratulate you on that. In terms of the question, it's very complicated. You have to think about many different things. We have to think about country specifics. We have to think about what type of businesses each country houses. But what I did want to say here was a series of proposals that aim to reduce that inequality, especially from countries that have the lowest youth unemployment rate. I think it's better that maybe I have to say this to make sure that everybody here stays awake today. So in terms of the areas of action that we look at in the Federation, we are working on a directive for wage transparency, because young people really have to take this struggle to heart and make sure that this wage gap does not continue to exist. And this goes for salaries in different sectors, in different companies. And we have to put an end to these salary gaps across all sectors. Then we are looking at also minimum wages. Now we've got to quite an advanced stage with this one, but we really have to drive it forward. And we want every country to have a minimum wage that actually covers living costs in each country. So in other words, a living wage, a minimum wage that is an actual living wage. We also believe that it's a good idea to work in platforms and to see how policies develop in different sectors. In Spain, what we're doing at present is a really good example, looking at regulation and trying to protect workers from all different sectors, and looking at what the model is in the country. We also are looking at informal employment. What jobs we're looking at cover a large spectrum. Should I carry on with my intervention? I wasn't sure whether you wanted to just have a conversation. We're also looking at regulating remote working, working from home, we're more and more connected every day through mobiles, through different electronic devices, and we want to make sure that this new regulation that covers working from home makes sure that there are limits as to when we are available to work, because we don't want workers to have to constantly be paying attention to the phone outside of working hours. We are also looking at paid placements. I know that Alithia is really fighting for this, and ETUC is really supporting this issue. It's extremely important, although we're very far advanced in it. We are introducing a series of reforms and initiatives so that placements actually work as a type of employment contracts. And we're also working on a statute for non-work placements, which would include some type of remuneration. For example, when they're doing Erasmus placements, especially to make sure that they don't have to run into extra costs. We have a great opportunity here to improve the implementation of employment opportunities for young people. The youth guarantee was a disaster here in Spain when it was first implemented. It was badly designed. It didn't include the social stakeholders. But now we have a new plan, ready to go, a new framework that will improve training, that will emphasize quality employment for young people, and that this will be a youth guarantee, an extra youth guarantee. And that's one of the key issues that we're looking at. I also wanted to mention certain things that we're looking at over the medium term. For example, climate change, which I know that you're going to speak about later. But we have a challenge in employment terms because we're looking at the fair transition, which will include sustainability. That will cover people who leave one sector and move to another and recycle and upcycle. There's also the idea of a right to emancipation, to have your own life, to live independently. And at the moment, what we've seen is just patches to cover the problems. And really what we need is to implement policies that recognize the right to proper housing, if we want to guarantee safe housing for all, then we may have to take into consideration the idea of limiting rents. And this right, living independently, would also be linked to the right to work. One of the other challenges is the participation of young people in decision-making spaces and in public debates. That's a huge challenge. It's an intergenerational challenge. And we have to move forward in creating those spaces so that young people feel at ease in these spaces. What we've seen is that when young people take longer to get a job, they take longer to leave home, they're not taken into consideration in decision-making spaces, and they are not explained how society works, also what protections they actually have, what welfare society means. And one of the knock-on effects of this is that popularism rises because it turns complex problems into a simple us or them. I think I've got to 10 minutes and I don't want to overdo anything. So thank you very much.
Te han sobrado 40 segundos, de hecho.
You've had 40 seconds left, you know. Thank you, Eduardo, for talking about the bottlenecks that affect the situation of youth today in Europe. And one of your proposals that you said you were working on was access to affordable housing. And we've got Dara here from Ireland, although you live in Brussels. And you've just arrived from France. You've had a little busy journey.
From Brussels.
I'm a true European. You know?
It's very messy. Coordinador de investigación de...
So for Housing Europe, affordable housing is one of the key issues for young people in Europe, and not in every country. It's looked at differently. For example, in Germany, the Netherlands, they look at reforming social housing, whereas in Spain, they are giving housing benefits as opposed to building new social housing. So 50% of 18 to 25-year-olds in the EU do not live on their own. In Spain, we have an even higher rate. In the Balearics, we also have added issues. There's a huge demand for seasonal workers for housing here. We have a huge problem with supply and demand in the Balearic Islands. So where do we start? How do we manage this? How do we deal with access to housing?
A very easy question. Well, I have 10 minutes, but I'll try to be brief. I mean, the first thing is to realize that housing is a right. We need to put housing back in the same category as health, as education, as vital public infrastructure, as dealing with the environmental issues. We somehow forgot in the recent decades that housing is a human right. It's something we all need fundamentally in order to succeed. Housing is not just a place to live, it's a place where you can gain a sense of independence, it's a place where you can have friends and socialize, a place to give you warmth when it's cold, a place to keep you cool when it's warm. It's really linked to so much of the results that we have in our lives. So we need to start thinking about housing as a human right. That's really the place to begin, I think. So when we've forgotten about that, we really think about housing more and more as being an asset or an asset class or a way to make money. And that's led to a huge amount of difficulties we have in Europe at the moment. We've gotten away from thinking about housing for what it really is, which is something that we all fundamentally need, and without which we can end up in some pretty bad situations. So I think that's the thing, is to really think about housing in a different way than we have been doing in recent decades. For the rest of my few minutes that I have left, I believe I have a presentation, although I don't know if it will be shown while it's being, yes, perfect. So my name is Dara Turnbull. I'm the research coordinator at Housing Europe. For those of you who don't know, Housing Europe is the European Federation of Public, Cooperative and Social Housing Providers. So we bring together European providers, European federations who provide public, cooperative and social housing. Thank you. In Spain, for example, I have a member called Alviesa, who have a local representation here in the Balearic Islands, IBAVI, and in fact I'll be visiting one of their social housing buildings here in Palma tomorrow morning, which I'm very looking forward to because they really put an emphasis on circularity and sustainability and using local building materials and recycled building materials. So you should all be very proud of yourselves, those of you who live in Palma and the Balearic Islands, because you actually, whether you know it or not, are really at the forefront of sustainability in development of housing and social housing. So well done for that. Yeah, I'll skip past this one. But this is who Housing Europe is, who we represent. So again, we provide homes to we provide more than 25 million homes right across Europe, both inside and outside the European Union. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the current housing situation in Europe. This is the result of a recent poll conducted by the European Commission, the Eurobarometer poll, which maybe some of you are familiar with. And basically, it's people's attitude to housing. So the blue bars will show you the number of young people, so those aged 25 to 34, who said that housing was the main issue facing them in their life. The orange bar will show the total population and the number of people from the total population who said that housing was the main issue facing them in their day-to-day life. And what you see, which is again not surprising, is that far more young people say that housing is an issue for them versus the general population. So nothing to be surprised about, but it's good to represent that graphically. Another issue, and it's something that you mentioned, is that young people are spending more and more time living at home. Now, part of that can be cultural, part of that can be whatever it might be, but a large part of that we know from research is to do with housing and affordability. So what I've tracked here is on the x-axis you have the average age at which a young person moved out of the family home in 2004, and on the y-axis is the average age in which they moved out of the family home in 2021. And what we see basically is that in a majority of EU countries, young people are spending more time at home and leaving home at a later age, and that a large part of that is to do with the unaffordability of housing. And if you just take one example there, Portugal, in 2004, the average Portuguese person left their family home at about 28, and today it's 36. It's been a huge increase in number of member states, and a large part of that is driven by the unaffordability of housing. To focus on the Portuguese case, you see here on the very far right, we have Lisbon, the capital city of Portugal, arguably the most unaffordable city for housing in all of Europe at the moment. Basically, what my colleagues and I tried to do here is to look at average incomes, average net incomes of people, not specifically young people, and compare those to the average rental price for a one-bedroom or two-bedroom apartment. So when we talk about housing affordability, there is no formal definition of housing affordability. No one can say, yes, this housing is affordable or this housing isn't affordable. But a rough measure that we often use in housing research is a 30% rule. If you're spending more than 30% of your net income on housing, typically we would say that housing is unaffordable for you. So you see here on the chart, we have an orange line, which is set at 30%. If the other bars are above that orange line, it means that the cost of an apartment within those cities is going to be above 30%, meaning they're unaffordable. And what we see here is that in the vast majority of European cities, housing is unaffordable. Private rental housing is unaffordable. And what's interesting about this is not a low-income household. This is not a young household. This is a typical middle-income household who already are experiencing housing unaffordability. If you're a young person or a student or someone who's starting out in life with your first job, housing is going to be really, really unaffordable for you. And the problem we have there is that if you already live in a city like Lisbon, for example, where housing is very unaffordable, okay, you can continue to live with your parents while you find your first job or while you go to university. But if you live in a rural Portugal, for example, and you need to move to Lisbon to take up employment or education or training and to advance your life prospects, then you have a problem. So we have this insider versus outsider problem. People who already grow up in and live in relatively privileged housing positions versus people who need to access the same housing. And it's leading to a huge discrepancy in lifetime outcomes for young people, depending on where they grew up or how wealthy their parents or the family might be. So what can our sector, my sector, social housing, public housing, cooperative housing, what can we do about it? So just to give you one example of kind of a very good system, which is Denmark. In Denmark, social housing specifically provided for young people is a long-term, well-established form of public housing provision. So it's housing that's affordable, specifically aimed at young people, like students, like people who are moving within Denmark to take up employment opportunities, and also, crucially, to tackle youth homelessness, which has been a growing issue in Europe in recent decades. And what we see here is that the average Danish person leaves the family home at 21 years of age versus the EU average of 27 years of age. So this does work. This does help to give people housing independence at a younger age than might be the case otherwise. And I looked quickly online to see what type of student housing or what kind of youth housing is available in Denmark. This is a home which is currently available to rent just outside Copenhagen. It is a social housing unit, if you can believe it. I know it looks very modern and chic and Nordic, but this is social housing, and it is for young people. So if any of you are Danish or have any friends in Denmark, you could have this apartment. And another example, which is the kind of opposite end of the spectrum, is Slovenia. Slovenia, we don't really think about Slovenia when we think about housing affordability issues, but they do have a growing housing and affordability crisis in Slovenia. It's a small country with poor public transport links, meaning that if you don't live in Ljubljana, effectively the biggest city, it can be quite hard to get access to employment and education opportunities. But they're trying to do something about it. They've realized that they need to do something about it and be proactive to house young people affordably, and they are. So the main social housing agency in Slovenia has now begun to develop housing for those specifically aged 18 to 29. And what's really interesting about it is it's not just any old housing, it's housing that really puts young people and the needs of young people right into the design process. To give you an example, this is a recently completed social housing development for young people in Slovenia. And what you're seeing here in the photograph is the co-working space that is actually part of the development. So if you live in the building, you can come here, you can take business meetings, you can organize conferences. This is your space, you can use it as you wish, and it's part of the development. I realize I only have a few seconds left, so I'll be very brief. These are the main asks from Housing Europe in terms of how member states, how localities, how the EU even can help to support better housing outcomes for young people. And not surprisingly, the number one thing that list is invest more in affordable housing. It's really not that difficult. If you invest more in affordable housing, there will be more affordable housing and more affordable housing for young people. Yeah, I won't go through the rest of these slides, but yeah, they're all on the same theme of quality housing, secure housing, affordable housing. And then just to conclude, the International Social Housing Festival is happening in Helsinki in a few weeks. And actually the theme of the conference this year is on this issue of young people and their housing opportunities. So if any of you feel like coming to Helsinki in the middle of June for a full week of discussion on housing issues, social housing issues, and young people, then you're more than welcome. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dara. Vamos a acabar esta primera ronda de intervenciones con la intervención de Víctor Camino, secretario.
Now we're going to speak with Víctor Camino, the Secretary General of Young Spanish Socialists. Now, housing and employment are two of the main problems in Spain at the moment. And what do Young Spanish Socialists say about this? What have they got to contribute to this topic? Good afternoon. Thank you very much. For the Social Democrats, for organizing this event to have a view of what young people think and to have different perspectives. And to be a meeting point to talk about what's happening to our generation. Now, when we talk about youth and young people, we have to think that it's not just a standardized element. There are different types of young people, different types of youths. There are young people who are very different from one another. Where you are born, you are from a certain context, from a certain situation, and that means that you grow up in a different way and that you develop in a different way. So we have to take these specificities into account. When you grow up in a certain postcode area, you may well have more difficulties, especially if you come from the outskirts of cities in poorer areas. And really, this idea of the culture of effort is the only thing that you have in order to make your life better. Now, as Spanish socialists, we have a whole set of proposals to make sure that we include this diversity amongst young people and how we react to young people from working class backgrounds having a worse start in life than middle classes who have different backgrounds and who may well inherit things from their families. So really, we need to focus on this. We have to think about a starting point of how you develop as a young person. What's in your background? And we have to stop about just analyzing these things, but we have to get action plans into place. And I like to be an optimist. For example, here in Spain, we've got the government of Pedro Sanchez, and as in the Balearics here with Francina Armengol. And these two governments are looking at the welfare state and are taking into account young people the young people that for many, many decades had been abandoned by the government. And what's the knock-on effect of that? Well, then young people don't have any interest in politics. So we have to make sure that young people are at the center of decision-making processes, and that we as young people can provide our own proposals for debate. Now, one of the great issues here in Spain has been the employment reform bill that was passed by the current government, and we talked about this, Eduardo and I. And it really had a positive impact because it was the first time that many young people had had a permanent employment contract and that they were actually offered an alternative to have a decent entry and a decent contract and a decent connection to the labor market. Because before the reform, 8 out of 10 had contracts that were only 7 days long. So this is one of the great advances that we've made. This left-wing government in Spain has made, because that actually frames the way that you view your life. Because it gives you a sense of expectation, it gives you a sense of hope. And then that also links to the idea of mental health. And we can't just talk about jobs or work, because really we have to think about wider issues. We have to think about our mental health. We have to see that we are actually able to leave home, to live independently. And if we don't see that and we are not happy, then how do we face the future? If there are policies in place that offer us opportunities, that offer us decent work, that offer us affordable housing, that means that our mental health will be better. And we won't have to invest so much in psychology and psychoanalysis services for young people, because there are 11 suicides per day in Spain. And it's heartbreaking. But remember, there are optimistic elements here. I've just mentioned the employment reform bill, and sorry, I don't want to wander off. But what I do want to say is that thanks to the Socialists, I think there's hope for the future. The minimum wage has gone up to €1,000 a month. They will now have more financial abilities. They are now talking about introducing permanent contracts for research staff at higher education institutions. And this, for example, if we link it to the pandemic we just lived through, these types of people will be essential for the next set of vaccines that we'll need to come up with. We're talking about lots of different policies and lots of different policies that are being discussed with different social stakeholders, and where the focus is being put on, for example, placements. Placements that are paid, because we've all been through this, and we all thought, oh, this is just the way it is. We have to become an intern, and we don't get paid for this, and then we'll suffer later on, and then we'll start with low-paid jobs. But it's not the truth. We're making advances, substantial advances, and substantial progress. And we are going to hear from the Minister for Housing on what advances and what progress is being made, and how young people can ask for support. There are 400 million euros available for low-income households so that they are able to access housing in a simpler way. And, for example, for the over 18s, they're accessing the civil service, accessing professional training. All of this will provide us with opportunities, and it's really becoming similar to the countries in Northern Europe that have been doing this for a long time. Now, we're still far from the way things are done in the north, but really we're taking it seriously now. There'll be 800,000 new qualifications available in professional training for young people. So what's being proposed? What we have to do is speed all these policies up. We have to speed up the implementation of different laws, for example, the new internship bill that's going through. What we have to do is we have to create a context of hope. I think really we are very pessimistic, especially here in Spain, and we criticize and we constantly think the worst, and we always think, oh, we don't want these people to build the future for us. We want to do it. And we need to really get away from that mindset, and we have to think about young people. Lots of people say, oh, young people are so reactionary, they can't do things. And they're trying to introduce their priorities onto the political agenda, their own specific demands. But the truth is that if people listen to us, if we become at the center of these policies, things will happen. Policies will come out. And we will feel that the world makes sense and that politics make sense. If we get affordable housing, if we get decent work, we're going to be happy, and we are going to not suffer. Our mental health is not going to suffer. And I think that that's probably the major point that I want to make here. And I think we will be working with Eduardo about the different demands from youth. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias a los tres. Sintetizando lo que han dicho nuestros primeros ponentes, podríamos decir que hacen falta políticas concretas para el acceso a un trabajo digno. Hay que poner a la vivienda a la altura de otras cuestiones como, por ejemplo, la salud y la educación. Tenemos que tener en cuenta que no todos los jóvenes son iguales, hay diferencias, hay diversidad entre los jóvenes, por ejemplo, aquellos que viven en una periferia social. Y las propuestas concretas, decía ahora Víctor, tienen que ser la base para el cambio, un cambio en el que hace falta que los jóvenes intervengan. Si os parece, vamos a dar paso ahora a algunas intervenciones más, ahora desde las butacas. Por ejemplo, tenemos entre nosotros...
We're going to be hearing a bit about, from our audience. Justice Soriano comes from Talent for Future and is with us this afternoon because he also wants to talk a bit in this first panel. And I think he also wanted to ask some questions to our speakers. So go ahead, Justi. Thank you. My name is Justi of Talent for Future. I'm the Balearic Islands delegate. We are a platform working with 90 civil society organizations in order to reconnect the youth with politics and also to make sure that they are represented in the decision-making processes. We need the young people to understand that they need to be involved in politics and that politics is not only about political parties. Also, we need the institutions to realize that young people, besides being a percentage of the electorate who are going to give them some votes, are also the ones who are going to have to be able to sustain public policies in the future. So we need to be taken into account if they want these policies to be effective and sustainable. In the Balearics, as in the rest of Spain, having affordable housing is getting harder and harder. We want the parties to work together with young people first to design a system of subsidies that's broad enough to be able to include everybody. And secondly, we need to put an end to real estate speculation. This is the only way that young people and students will be able to have affordable housing. That's not like a little hobbit's hole. We also need to be part of the politics architecture so that it doesn't serve only certain vested interests. After all these years of crisis, the fact of being young or a student needs a certain consideration and empathy that is not often seen in our society. So we need to be able to develop without being at risk of burnout all the time. We need that all political parties make a commitment, a firm commitment, to improve the democratization processes through deliberative processes with better strategies to improve mental health, as you were saying before, investment and public subsidies for renewable energy equipment to promote the transition to green economy and green energy, and also that all the different communities of every society are included in all these decisions. Lastly, I would like to address a question to all the politicians who are here. How do you think the problem of suicides and mental health among the young can be solved? It's one of the first causes of death in Spain. And there's still months of waiting lists in hospitals in order to access psychologists. And with this, I will end my intervention. Thank you very much.
Pues estoy mirando y entre el público.
So in the audience, I see a former health counselor who's now the president of the regional parliament, Vicente Tomás. And as you were appealing to the present politicians, maybe you could answer a bit about what policies can be implemented to fight particularly stigmatization of suicide among the young. Now we have an emergency number in Spain which is receiving about 800 calls every day and referring between 20 and 30 cases to emergency centers because there are cases of potential suicide. I don't know if you would like to offer something. Can I speak in Catalan? Yes.
Well, thank you for the question. I'm not prepared for the answer, actually, but I'll try. I believe that, like everything else, it depends on many aspects. In a society, the environment that creates the situations depends on many factors. And I think that, first of all, one has to start with the predictive work. In the government of the Balearic Islands, we had an initiative to create the Observatory of Preventing Suicides, which already exists. And I believe that the medical part, which is without a doubt very important, but I believe it's not the most important one. The most important aspect is to prevent those suicides. So we're talking about education, about having channels available where one can access help. They can be due to problems that might be personal problems or problems in the work environment, or simply maybe it's a difficulty of leaving the nest. And I think this is something that we need to tackle very broadly, and maybe eventually you need a family doctor. I have worked as a family doctor for many years, and I think that this type of problems need to be tackled by a group of professionals. So the doctor that would work in the health department, a nurse very often is very helpful. Clearly, you can use hospitals as well, but I'm talking more of having resources closer to the community. So from your family doctor to begin with, yeah? Because if you have to go to the hospital, you're already facing a bigger problem. So we have to work on prevention. And I think this is something we need to do not at the short term, but at the mean and long term. I believe that in a society, the problems regarding health are due to what determine those problems. They're not problems that are specific from the health sector. We really need to work in different areas and use all that we have at our disposition to help and prevent. And obviously, not all the tools that we have to do with doctors or hospitals. There are many other areas that also play an important role. Don't know if I've answered your question, but I did what I could. Thank you, Vicens.
Sí que ha comentado.
Justi mentioned the word speculation when talking about housing access. So Dara, who is from Ireland and which one of the most affected countries by the real estate bubble from the last decade, maybe he can give us an idea of this real estate speculation that impacted so much in the last decade and that it could affect the European countries again.
Yes, indeed. So Ireland was, like Spain, had a very significant housing bubble. Housing became massively overvalued leading up to a huge crash in about 2008, in which we saw peak to trough decline in house prices of over 50%. You know, people lost life savings, people lost huge amounts of income, people ended up in huge amounts of debt, and actually that fed a lot of depression from people who had felt they were doing well in life, who then in their 30s or maybe even 40s ended up back at home living with their parents again, and that led to a huge amount of depression, particularly amongst young men. So there is definitely a link between housing and depression in many instances. But what's happening today, specifically when it comes to the housing speculation, is probably two main things. On one side, you have the short-term rental issue, Airbnb, for example. I know that in Spain, that's something that you know a lot about. I'm not sure what the situation is in Palma, but Palma is a very sunny, nice place to come on holidays. I'm sure there are plenty of Airbnbs here. And when you look online, maybe you find many more Airbnbs than you find homes to rent for permanent residents. And that's a huge problem. And what we've seen in many cities, I talked about Lisbon, for example, earlier on, is that permanent residents are being pushed out, and Airbnbs and kind of cool neighborhoods for young people with lots of bars and cafes and so on are coming in. And we're seeing a professionalized short-term rental market where people don't just own one apartment, they own 20, 30, 40, even a whole building, which is Airbnb. And that's driving what we call financialization of housing, basically where you can make more money renting your home as an Airbnb, for example, even if it's not full all year round, than you can by renting it to a full-time tenant. And that's creating a huge difficulty. And that's something that has been recognized by the OECD, for example. They produced an annual report which basically showed that was the case in many European cities. And the European Commission have also produced research showing that this is the case. The second thing that's happening, and we're actually at a really pivotal moment, is we've had, because of quantitative easing, because of the work of the European Central Bank to keep interest rates very low to try and spur economic activity, very low interest rates has also led to very, very low bond yields. I'm an economist, I won't give you all an economics lesson, but basically, if you're a pension fund or you're someone with money, you want to invest somewhere, you need to get a good rate of return. And the typical ways of getting good rates of return, like bond markets, for example, weren't giving you what you wanted in recent years. So people looked around, where am I getting a good rate of return? It's housing. You know, in Dublin, for example, where I'm from, the annual yield on a one-bedroom apartment is 12%. Whereas if you put that next to a German long-term bond yield, you're actually losing money. You're getting a negative yield. So 12% on one side from a house, negative yield from a German bond. It's a no-brainer. Your investment, of course, is going to plow money into housing. The problem we now have is that we have this over-financialization of housing, where housing has become an asset. But interest rates are going to begin to rise bit by bit now. And what the ECB, and they had a paper about this out yesterday, basically said is that they think we could be heading for a kind of a property market crash, where the property market massively corrects itself. People who had invested in property begin to leave because they can get a better return elsewhere. And we have this kind of same as we had in 2007, 2008, overinvestment in housing, and then suddenly it all falls apart. So it is a really worrying time, and to the politicians, particularly those of you working at the European level, you need to be on top of this, and you need to make sure that we find a way today to make sure that we don't end up in the same situation we ended up in a decade ago, where people's lives are put at risk and people's homes are put at risk because of financial speculation.
Thank you, Dara. Tenemos entre nosotros a...
We have among us Xavier Triana from the Spanish Youth Council. Hello, Xavier, how are you? You wanted to contribute something too, right? So my name is Xavier, and these youth councils are agencies that for 40 years have been officially representing the young people in space, and also coordinates all the Spanish young associations. In 1998, the Spanish Youth Council, which is devoted to getting to know the reality of young people and issuing reports, carried out a study about how the young people were doing in terms of becoming independent from their parents. Since 2008, data has become quite catastrophic. And when it started to look like in 2018, 2019, the situation was starting to improve, then COVID arrived, and the current situation is quite bad. In the second semester of 2021, we've had the worst data of the decade. Now it seems like the first semester of 2022, things are improving a little bit, but the fact is that only 1.4 out of 10 people can actually leave their home, their parents' home, before 30 years. And right now, a young person would have to invest 84% of their income for housing. And these are very shameful figures. So what can we do from public policies, both at the European or state level, in order to improve the situation of the young people in this regard? So I would like to hear about specific measures that can be implemented at the state level, and also framework measures, which is what the European Union usually does. What kind of measures could be implemented to ensure the possibility for young people to emancipate themselves? Victor talked about the subsidies the Spanish government has been assigning to access to housing, and we also know that housing policies are different between the different countries. In Spain, the option has been direct subsidies, whereas in Denmark, they're trying to achieve access to housing through building this housing specifically for young people. What do we need in Spain in order to come to their level? We're starting to tackle the housing sector right now. There is no inventory of housing in Spain. We don't really know. We are a bit strange in that sense because we don't have a housing inventory. So it's really difficult to carry out a diagnosis whether the dwellings are empty or occupied or in what condition they are. But I think there are some specific proposals that can help us to become independent, which is building much more public housing, which would require a multi-level agreement from all different levels of government. And at least a part of this, 15–20%, would be assigned to young people. This could be a bit of a shortcut, but it would be a way to accelerate this process. There are some progressive governments who are already doing it because we have the duty to accelerate these policies. Other policies like the housing law, which is very broad and not quite specific enough, and it needs to be improved. But regulating rentals, the amount of rental people have to pay, is necessary in order to be able to find a balance so that the rental is affordable, but it's also profitable for the landlords. And this is what governments need to do, and particularly in strained areas. We could also create observatories of real dwellings where young people have access to, and trying to make it all a bit more global. How can we involve young people further in politics? One of our proposals will be generating a dialogue forum for young people led by the presidency of the government, which can deal with young people's challenges in a cross-cutting way. And this needs to be given more visibility, it needs to be transparent. And the Youth Council needs to play a fundamental role in all the meetings. In all the meetings where I've been, I've always said that, how private, public, social, institutional agents need to talk to each other and setting the youth's priorities where they need to be. Because we will see that everything is interconnected. The same in mental health. How can we avoid suicides? How can we avoid mental health problems? How can we do it in environments where all these issues can be discussed and dealt with to help improve our daily lives, both from prevention and also afterwards, implementing daycare centers for children and youth with mental health issues. Some communities have already started to do it. In the region of Valencia, it was announced today by the health counselor that they're going to create 3 centers that will open before the end of the year to assist many people, among them children and youth, with health problems, mental health problems. So this is time to really make things specific and take them into action, and being aware that we have to be there and we have to design all these policies, and we have to do it also beyond our borders. So this is why I so welcome these conferences of future of Europe because they take us beyond our own borders, and we can really bring to the table the priorities of young people. Thank you, Xavier. I'm only a moderator here because there are places in Spain where you can spend 20,000 euros, but you have to go to certain places in Spain where nobody wants to live. Like in the middle of Castile, where a young person would have a really hard time finding a job. So we are facing problems like jobs and housing access that are always very much interlinked. In the Balearics, we have also a limitation of territory. We don't have as much ground available. It's a fragile territory that needs to be protected because it's islands. So there's many problems coming together. I'm not sure whether we have Timotei Sala, whether he's connected. Could he speak to us? Timo comes from Song, Finland. I'll try to Tervetuloa, which means welcome in Finnish. So we are now seeing you on screen.
For our participants.
Can you hear me?
So go ahead.
Dear friends, greetings from Finland and thank you for a great discussion so far. I have two questions for you. First, as a result of the green transition and many other things, the labor market has changed radically, which will also affect the employment of the young people and the demands of the working life. How do you see the role of education in combating youth unemployment and creating quality jobs? In your opinion, should we do more so that young people from different backgrounds can access schools and therefore have a better chance in work life? And my second question is, should cheaper housing for young people be supported through more regulation of the housing market, such as a price cap, or are there other ways, like the Denmark model, better to support more of the cheaper housing in your opinion? Thank you.
Os voy a preguntar quién quiere responder.
So I would like to ask you, who would like to answer Timo? Eduardo, maybe? Thank you very much, Timo, for your question. I think we have spoken about some measures here that could help create better quality employment, regulation measures that would raise the wages, for instance. But in order to generate more employment, in the case of Spain, we need to change the productive model. We keep putting all the eggs in the same basket as we have been doing. No matter how many new young employment policies you implement, they will all be directed to having to compete for the same jobs that we already have and that we have to compete with other age groups. So these policies would need to be combined with other policies of industrial development or policies that boost other strategic sectors and that actually generate net employment. With this new employment, with the new educational demand, which we have linked to a proper prospection in the territory, through all this, you can give young people an opportunity to see how they can actually direct their path towards the future employment. And this is how this could be generated. Because otherwise, what we end up seeing is that many of these funds that we have to boost young employment ends up going towards incentives. Like, for instance, a company says, I need a new employee. So who is going to be cheapest for me? Oh, I have all these subsidies here. I have all these bonuses. So I'll take an under 30 because I'm saving money. But this is not the way to stimulate the labor market. Thank you. Unfortunately, Switzerland and the UK are not part of the UK. because otherwise we could say that we are actually working with British punctuality, because although we are in the Balearics, we have ended this panel 1 minute before the appointed time. The Minister for Transport, Mobility and Urban Agenda, Raquel Sanchez, has just come in, and we're going to take advantage of her presence here to say goodbye to you. You can go back to your seats, and we're going to welcome the Minister. And we would like to ask her to come up here to the stage to address some words to the audience. And she's also accompanied by the Spanish government delegate in the Balearics, Aina Calvo.
Muy buenas tardes.
A very good afternoon to everybody here. I didn't want to interrupt the dialogue that you are having here, but I am extremely happy to be here today and to accompany you in this event organized by Socialists and Democrats in Europe and our colleagues from the Balearic Islands and from the Socialist Youth Movement. And I think it's been really interesting to be able to hold this type of event, which is looking to create a fairer Europe for our young people. And that's the most important point. We're here to talk about you, young people, but really to not talk about you, but to talk with you, to hear from you. In any society, the young people are the future. They're the hope. You represent what will happen to our country. You represent the dreams of Europe that, even though it lives through uncertain times and all difficult circumstances and threats, and these concerns are being fed by the far right, but we continue to be a hopeful Europe, and we can face any type of adversity. As you know, the Socialist Party is committed to young people. We're currently facing difficult, complicated times. But socialist policies are aware that we cannot commit the same mistakes that were made in the past during the last financial and property crisis. A crisis that led to an entire generation becoming resigned and to opt out of society, that had no hope about having alternatives, but they really are alternatives. And we are listening to you, and we want you to know that our proposals will present solutions. We're going to take your ideas, we're going to listen to you, and we're going to put ideas forward. You are our future. And it's up to you to defend justice, to defend human rights, democracy. And that is what the European project is in essence. You need to be where decisions are made. Nothing can be built without your involvement. Over the years, social democracy has always kept its ties to younger generations. We are nothing without your contribution and without your drive, without your new idea, and without new ideas and your transgressive ideas often. and you make us feel closer to people. You are an essential part. So as socialists, we have to be part of the huge transformations that we are facing, and we have to be aware, all of us, all ages, we have to defend our rights. We have huge challenges today in society, linked to freedoms, linked to gender equality, linked to the environment, linked to housing, because there is no real liberty without recognizing these rights. We defend the freedom of women and the freedom of women, and we defend it not being a negotiable issue. A woman should be able to go home alone in whatever condition she likes. We shouldn't have these ideas of being, we need to be protected. And that is what the right wing and the far right is selling to people right now. We, as socialists, are obliged to protect the most vulnerable in society, to get them out of poverty. These are essential pillars to the welfare state that we support. We need decent wages. We need decent jobs. We need to recognize housing as a fundamental right. In this complicated and complex society, we as socialists want to make sure that you young people have opportunities in the future and do not have to suffer. Now, you know that we like to talk about freedoms a lot. And the truth is that when the right comes into power, they might talk about it, but they never do anything about it. And they make sure that young people don't actually get to enjoy the freedoms that they talk about. We do. The right led us into austerity, and now what Pedro Sanchez and our government is doing is the exact opposite. We want to make sure that things are done differently. We are fully aware that fighting for the young people will ensure progress in our society. In this sense, we want to guarantee the right to housing, the right to education, to ensure that you have decent working conditions. These are fundamental points for us. To ensure employment stability and to ensure that this is a fact through the new Labour bill that we passed this year. The government is focused on young people. We know that you have suffered and you are suffering and you are still from terrible contracts, and we are not resigned to this as the fate that you have to face. The employment bill is really helping with creating employment. We're creating affiliations to Social Security that are at historic levels in society, across all age ranges, especially amongst young people. So our labour reform, our employment reform has been essential, and we have set the basis for recovery. And to make work and to transform it into a source of dignity for everybody. What did the right-wing party do? What did the People's Party do here in Spain? Nothing. We are trying to concentrate on policies that go even beyond just a simple employment reform. We're talking about education. We're dedicating resources and finance to professional vocational training, to education. We are creating more places for vocational and educational training. And I would even say that we are going to guarantee opportunities to everybody, which double the amount of opportunities that they have had before. In the past few days, we've released the highest number of places to jobs in the civil service. We're going to ensure 75% of workers become stable employees and that they have a stable professional career. We're going to increase wages for new researchers. We're going to make sure that they also have permanent contracts. We're going to use the recovery funds for the environmental transformation process for our economy, and we will be pioneers in reindustrialization, and we will create quality employment for everybody. I think it's really important that we explain all these achievements and all these milestones we have achieved as a socialist government. And this government is proving that things can be done differently. So the Ministry of Transport works in a key area that all sectors of society use, and especially young people. Having a home is much more than 4 simple walls. It is a space where you can develop your life project. We feel at ease in our own homes. We feel secure. And that allows us to also exercise other fundamental rights in society. In this sense, as a society and as a government, we could not turn our backs on this problem, especially one that affects you so much as young people. The fact that you cannot find your own home means that your life gets started as an adult much later. Let's have a look at some of the data, because they're really important. %80 of 16 to 29-year-olds in Spain have to live with their parents because they cannot move out. They cannot access housing. We cannot resign ourselves to this being the reality. We cannot resign ourselves to the fact that people often have to spend huge percentages of their wages in order to pay for a home, that people are unable to get mortgages. In this sense, as socialists and as a government, we are not going to allow this to continue. I think you are perfectly aware of a lot of the measures that we've implemented to reverse all the negative effects that have been occurring in the country, that are there to correct mistakes that were made that are not your fault. But let's be sure, there are people guilty. There are certain political parties, there are certain politicians. Everything that these people did was aimed at increasing the bubble, at reducing the stock of public housing, increase wild speculation in the property market, in the housing market, and that all this led to rents becoming sky high. And so what we need to do is simply recognize what the Constitution says, that you have the right to decent housing. We have to promote policies that ensure access to decent housing. We are going to offer solutions. We are putting together measures right now. We are going to pass the bill on access to housing. And I am sure that we will be able to pass this bill with the maximum consensus amongst political parties, because it's absolutely necessary to have a regulatory framework that provides legal security, regardless of the autonomous regions having exclusive responsibility for housing. The central government must ensure that it favors and supports the right to decent housing. And I do hope that this bill will be passed over the coming months, probably in the last 3 months of this year. And I want to make sure that the law is then implemented within the autonomous regions. I am sure that the People's Party here in Spain will reject the huge reforms and transformations that we want to implement, and will try and block a law that we see as absolutely necessary. We're not just trying to pass a bill. We are also trying to create circumstances that enable housing to be built. We are providing funding for young people, for associations, for single-parent families, for women. There's a very important piece of information. The People's Party dedicated 475 million euros to housing policies. We, on the other hand, have provided 3.9 billion euros. And we will be increasing that amount to 10 billion to build public social housing. We were committed to public housing, and we are making it possible to happen here in Spain. We currently have around 290,000 units of public housing, which is nowhere near what we need. That only covers a tiny amount, 1.6% of the needs, of the recognized needs for housing in the market. We have to make sure that the public housing stock becomes consolidated, and we need to ensure that what we build amongst all of us works for everyone. The state will be building 100,000 houses targeted at vulnerable groups in society and young people. We've already built 10,000, 60,000 are currently being constructed, and 30% will be reserved for young people up to the age of 35. We are also offering housing benefits for rents in the state plan for housing from 2022 to 25. We will be offering subsidies of up to 60% for rent. And this is also able to be added to other benefits that we offer to young people. You know how the Young Purple's bond has worked, where that offers €250 per month for 2 years. And over the coming weeks, we will be releasing the basis for you to apply for these subsidies and grants and benefits. And this is all aimed at you having an initial opportunity to leave home and live independently. The challenges that we're facing are huge. We have a complex situation. It's a historical moment for us here. I'm not sure who said this, but when we had all the answers, the questions changed. So what we need is to reformulate our economic model and reformulate our society. And I do think that the Socialist Party and socialists in general are really capable of putting together policies that will solve this situation, especially in terms of what young people are asking for. You are our hope, you are our future, and we are working for you. And we are working tirelessly. We are completely committed. And I think that that's what makes us stand out. We will always listen to you. We will always support you. But we have to build a fair Europe based on what you need. Now, in Spain and in Europe, we have to work, but we have to also think about what is going to happen in the future. Thank you very much, and it's been a pleasure to be here this afternoon.
Muchas gracias, ministra.
Thank you, Minister. So now we are going to be hearing one of the youngest MEPs, Alicia Oms. She's also the president of European Young Socialists, and we're going to have a brief talk with her.
¿Qué tal, Alicia?
Bien.
How are you, Alicia? Fine. We've heard the views of several speakers, the minister, the regional president.
De los problemas que afectan.
Regarding the issues, the problems that are affecting young people and the challenges that we are facing in order to change things from the ground up. There is a fact that's very well known, that is that the young people are feeling very disaffected from politics. What do you think is the reason for that? Thank you very much, Pedro, and being here as a moderator of this event, and thank you to everybody who've come. Answering your question, I think there's a key time which really had a strong impact on us, which was the former recession. We were left aside. We were never given any answers to our needs. We went back in terms of opportunities. We went backwards instead of forwards because we are a generation that was told by our parents that if you study, if you learn languages, if you get a good education, you'll have a good future, you'll have good jobs, you'll be able to become independent. And it wasn't like that because the austerity policies totally impacted us. And I think at the end of the day, what happened was that people stopped believing in politics because they didn't agree with those austerity policies. They saw that they weren't being listened to. They were only being listened to when they had to put their vote in the ballot box. And I think this hasn't helped at all. I think we have now a government that's doing the total opposite. I think this is positive at European level. Also, there has been a different response to the previous crisis, and I think this can all help young people to feel more identified with politics and the policies that are being implemented. We have here several representatives of the Balearic Young Socialists. You already have quite a bit of experience, and now you are the chairwoman of the European Young Socialists. How do you reach out to young people from the Socialist Party? And also the truth is that the structure of European Young Socialists is an umbrella organization in which all organizations and member states, but not member states of the EU, because we also have countries from non-European territory, and they are part of this organization, and it is through them how we reach out to the different territories and to the different youth communities. We organize events, meetings with the different executive committees from the territories, and we try to reach out to the community of young people what we can do at a European level, because they know the local, regional, or national perspective, but sometimes the European perspective falls a bit far from them. So we have, for instance, Victor Camino today here from Spanish Young Socialists, with whom we have an excellent relationship. And what we try is to create these links in order to reach out to young people through them who are doing excellent work to achieve that. You are an MEP, but you're aware that the European Union and its institutions are very much unknown for the citizens in general. We have the Commission, Parliament, Council. We sometimes have a hard time understanding what each institution does and who is part of it. But now, after this pandemic, and now with the Russian-Ukrainian war or invasion, what are the strengths that you think Europe has that could offer young citizens? I think both with the COVID crisis and now with the war crisis, the socioeconomic consequences that we are experiencing, in this context, our strength is the union. Union is what makes us stronger. Acting together in order to find common responses to common challenges that we have. At the end of the day, those problems that we in Spain can have will be also experienced by any young people living in Germany, Belgium, or any other country in the EU. So I think it is very important that those issues are tackled in a common way, in a joint way, as we have seen now with the European recovery funds, which have helped a lot our country, but also our generation. So besides this togetherness, this unity, we also need to be recognized as a generation that has devoted a lot of effort, both in the prior crisis and the current one. And I would like to highlight that President von der Leyen has appointed this year the European Youth Year, which we hope means that they remember us and that their policies are going to be much more focused on young people in a transversal way, in all senses. Can I ask you how old you are? I'm 28, so you're very young. We accumulate youth, as Javier was saying. It has been said that your generation or slightly older generations are part of a generation that could be in danger to become a lost generation. Do you think that's true? I see that my generation and slightly older ones have had to deal with very serious problems coming from the financial crisis, and we are at risk of not being able to live better than our parents, which is kind of a tenet that's always been said, that each generation should be able to live better than their parents. So if we focus on this generation and giving them opportunities, and not only the ones who are young now, but the ones who were young 10 years ago when the crisis started, maybe we could break this unwritten rule that we are going to have a worse life than our parents. And I think putting young people in the center is something that identifies us as socialists. And we are working on that at all levels, from the European Parliament to the local level. And we are demonstrating that. But I think this unwritten rule can be broken, can be done away through policies that focus on young people. Policies that show us that we could manage resources in a different way, so there's a better redistribution in a fairer way. Is that what you were referring to, I assume? Thank you very much, Alicia. And now we're going to move on to the second panel. We're going to start the second panel, and I would like to call to the stage Agatha. She's a member of Generation Climate Europe. We also have Andrés Conde, the CEO of Save the Children Spain, and Maria Rodriguez, who's a board member of the European Youth Forum. The second panel will revolve around two issues that I think are very much connected: climate emergency and child and youth poverty. Why are they related? We will now talk to our three speakers about it and the causes for that. We're going to start with Agatha. Hello.
Agatha, debido a la emergencia.
Agatha, due to climate emergency, the extreme climate events will go in the rise in Europe over the next few years. It's something that we've already seen. But scientists say that human action could actually change the course of events, both in positive and negative terms, if they are reduced very quickly and a large scale, as in the reduction of emissions of gases and zero CO2 emissions, we could limit the climate change and its effects. This is what experts are saying. In December 2020, EU leaders agreed on a binding goal to the Paris agreements. And through those agreements, they committed to have a net reduction of greenhouse gases, reduction of at least 55% by 2030, as compared to the values in 1990. So it seems like the European Union leaders are really working hard to improve the goals of reduction of greenhouse gases. If you remember, in the last agreement, it was 30%, and now it's 55%, because they are seeing something is becoming very evident. They haven't been doing their homework in terms of climate emergency, and we find ourselves in a very worrying situation. I don't know if you are aware that here on the islands we are suffering this climate change with more intense and more frequent thunderstorms. We had 2 nights ago that caught us completely unprepared, and about 4 years ago we also had a very strong storm that killed 13 people, which is something unheard of in the Balearics before. So do you think are we still in time?
For the invitation. I wouldn't say I wouldn't say it's impossible for us to act on it. I think one of the most important things we have to realize is that now is the time to act. But something that is still really missing is that we don't have all generations on board. And something that's extremely important is to understand that many youth voices are still missing from this discussion and are still missing from the tables where decisions are being made. And I wanted to tell you a story. It's a story about Sophia. And Sophia is a young woman who comes from a small island in Greece. It's an island that's been experiencing a lot of fires over the last summers, and it's also an island with one of the highest youth unemployment rates in the region. Now, Sophia wanted to get involved in tackling the climate crisis, and she started wondering how to do so. And upon her research, she realized that actually majority of the national environmental law stems from the EU and stems from the EU level. And so she said, well, okay, how can I then become an advocate for climate at the EU level? And Sophia and many others realized that there are very little avenues of engagement. The EU decision-making processes continue to be very technical and very difficult for many young people to understand. And many of them also don't feel represented when they look at decision makers, when they look at the decisions that are being taken. And this is something that we're doing at Generation Climate Europe. We are amplifying the voices of young people in climate and decision-making processes. GC was founded in 2019, and it was a time when climate was really growing in the agenda. And there were a lot of demonstrations and strikes happening all around Europe and beyond. But that didn't really translate into what was happening in the EU institutions at the heart of the decision-making processes. And this is really important. There are several studies that show that the group of 18 to 35, which in many instances is considered as youth, is the least represented in legislatures. And it's also most underrepresented compared to its share in the population. Now, representation really matters for people like Sophia and for many of you, I'm sure, watching out there here in person and online. But it's also not just about representation. We also can't expect young people to be the only ones who are advocating for the interests of youth and future generations. And for that, we need a mindset change in the way we make decisions, in the way we design our policies. And at Generation Climate Europe, we believe that at the core of that transition should be intergenerational justice. So this idea of intergenerational justice is that the rights of the past, current, and future generations to a healthy planet, to well-being, are equal. Now, this is important, but let me tell you a little bit on how we can concretely implement that. And there are two key components. First one is the meaningful youth engagement, and the second one is future-proofing our policies. So when we talk about meaningful youth engagement, this is crucial because climate crisis and many other issues that we talked about today have a disproportionate impact on young people and on children, particularly those coming from marginalized and disadvantaged communities. And at GC, we recently published a report on the state of youth engagement in the implementation of the Just Transition mechanism, which is one of the EU mechanisms on the Just Transition. And we focus on those fossil fuels intensive regions because in many of those there are very high levels of unemployment and there are very limited opportunities both economic and social for future generations. So there are 3 key findings that we put forward in the report. One, out of 12 analyzed EU member states, only 7 somehow engage young people. And if they did so, they did this very superficially. In many cases, it was about external feedback after a whole process of discussions to one part of a document. It was rarely about co-creation. It was rarely about people, young people and decision makers coming together. The second finding was that national authorities actually lack the will and or skills to engage with youth. And the third one is that the most inspiring example that came from our research was actually engaged and was actually a result of engagement and mobilization by young people in the ground. So when we talk about meaningful youth engagement, we need to understand how can we measure that? How can we look at a certain process? How can we look at a certain policy and understand, well, is it meaningful youth engagement or is it not? And there are three key criteria that I wanted to put forward today. One is that it has to happen on a regular basis. They can't be just one-time events. These conferences where we have a room for young people, and brilliant young people come from all over the place to different countries, and they brainstorm and they discuss incredible ideas. And then we go maybe to a conference where these are presented. A lot of people nod, and a lot of people agree, and a lot of people, oh, it's so great to have youth inputs. And then nothing happens. We have incredible ideas out there, but there's a lack of a follow-up mechanism. There's a lack of implementation of these ideas. So this is incredibly important. And that leads me to my second point, is that meaningful youth engagement means structured youth engagement. That means incorporate into our decision-making process. That means seeing young people not as an addition to what we're discussing about, but as equal stakeholders that have to be at the table from the very start till the very end. And the third element is diversity. Engaging young people meaningfully means engaging variety of young people from marginalized communities, LGBTQ+ youth. Having a youth event where we only have young men speaking on a youth-related topic is not meaningful youth engagement. This is really, really important that we understand that, and many speakers talk about this today, that we do have diversity of young people out there. Now, the second key component of intergenerational justice is future-proofing our policies. And this is incredibly important because, as opposed to young people who we are actually able to invite to the table, we can't invite future generations to the table. They're so-called invisible stakeholders. So we need to consider their interests in the way we design our policies, in the ways we implement our decisions. One of the most powerful topics, one of the most powerful policies that we can focus on when we talk about the climate crisis is actually addressing the root of the climate crisis, which is overconsumption of natural resources. We talk a lot about decarbonizing our economy. We don't talk enough about dematerializing our economy. If everyone consumed like Europeans, for example, we would need 3 Earths to survive. Now, there's a reason why we're surviving, and that's because we're putting disproportionate burden on the global south. And this is not something that is fully considered and something that is receiving enough attention. And this is also placing a huge burden on those most vulnerable in our communities. So I wanted to finish with 2 key messages. First one is for all young people who are here today and who are watching us and who hopefully will be watching this in the future as well. Demand your space. Demand your space. Call out decision makers when your rights are not considered, when your interests are not considered. Don't believe that you need to have 30 years or 50 years of experience and 2 PhDs to be a valuable voice. Your voice matters, and this is incredibly important to understand. And this is also one of the most powerful acts of active citizenships that you can take. And for all those in power, in different positions here, be courageous enough to give your space and to give your access to decision makers, to those that are most affected by the climate crisis, and that is young people, that is children, that is youth organizations. And when you do take decisions, prioritize intergenerational justice in the policies you push for. Not just when youth representatives are around, or not just when we're talking about youth policy, but always, whenever any decision is being taken, be aware that this will have an impact, not only in the long term, but not only in the short term, but also in the long term. Thank you.
Thank you, Agatha. I didn't say that you are from Poland. Okay. Thank you and welcome.
Yes.
Podemos hablar ahora.
Now we can talk to Andrés, the director of Save the Children Spain. Europe and the European Union has been a benchmark in terms of human rights. And we want it to be a benchmark for the fight against climate change around the world. And when we talk about child poverty, we're talking about human rights. some indicators in the EU are worse than in other countries. So the average childhood poverty in the EU is around about 15%, but actually in certain other countries it's around about 30% in the EU, such as Romania. So is this linked to employment, housing, even the climate emergency? Yep. So, from the end. It's curious the way that we've organized this session, because we've talked about housing, we've talked about employment, we've talked about climate emergency, and now we're looking at childhood and youth poverty. We're looking at the consequences, lack of justice, social exclusion, and how in Europe it is young people and children who suffer the most. For example, housing costs are much more difficult for low-income families. When we look at quality jobs, when we look at Spain and Lithuania and Romania, where 40% of households are in poverty, the parents of those households work. So basically, poverty in employment is the new reality here. There's another point that I'd like to mention, which we haven't so far. We have a lack of child-raising policies. It's a really important problem. There are countries that actually see the childhood and adolescence as future human capital and as something that they need to invest in, and that they should sustain that population. Yet there are other countries like Spain where the responsibility for raising children falls on families almost exclusively, and for the most vulnerable households, that is often an unbearable load. I think we have an extraordinary chance now. And this is represented by implementing the childhood guarantee. And we have a very important role in this. And the European Parliament has made this possible. This guarantee is being studied by the European Commission, and the action plans that will be implemented in different European member states. This is actually happening now, and the aim is for early childhood education and access to healthy food, access to decent housing, and all the rights that young children need to make them less vulnerable will be covered. And I think as socialists and as the Socialist Party, we have a major role to play in making sure that this is implemented across Europe. Now remember that children and adolescents are the future. They are going to build future Europe. And I also wanted to highlight the social context and to have confidence in social progress. The policies that we need can materialize, because if we don't have them, we will see major consequences. We have a huge focus. We have to concentrate on people who are the most vulnerable. We have to focus on that group, because that will be the most effective way to correct the inequalities that we have in society today. And it is limiting our development in Europe. Now I'm going to concentrate on Spain and then look at Europe afterwards. We have a strange social anomaly here in Spain, because 31% of children living in poverty and exclusion and the half of those are in a severe situation of poverty in Spain. So the population questionnaires have shown that there is a large percentage of people who cannot turn on the heating in winter, people who can't eat properly more than 3 times a week. They can't eat meat, they can't eat fish, or they can't eat vegetarian dishes. There is a huge number who are unable to pay their rent. This affects 9% of the population here in Spain. And let's not forget inflation, because inflation adds an extra burden onto low-income households. When we look at the impacts, we see inflation hitting housing, hitting energy, and hitting food. And it's the most vulnerable who suffer this. Now, I wanted to also comment on the cost of raising a child. 2 to 3 weeks ago, we saw in a result. Bringing up a child. Raising a child costs around about an average of 687 euros per month. The average wage in Spain is 1,900 euros. What does this mean? If you have 2 children in a single parent family, that family will live in poverty. And why is this? Because there's no public policies to support raising children. In other countries, the costs are shared by the state, by government, and we here in Spain really need to make some progress on this issue. Now remember, this is not just a demographic challenge, this is an economic challenge for the country. Remember that people are having less and less children today, and we don't have the reproduction rate that we need. And why is that? Why is that? It's because people cannot afford it, because children and child raising is seen as a burden. And this economic situation means that families have to make decisions. They have to put off having children. And this is in Spain. So what happens in Europe? So now, of course, this is a really high. We have a really high rate of this in Spain. But what is happening in Europe in comparison? And the truth is, it's not that different. 1 out of every 4 children live in poverty. Romania, Bulgaria, Spain, 1 in 3. Childhood poverty is a cross-cutting, in fact, it's a cross-cutting issue, and it is across Europe. Studies have shown that there are 2 ways we can approach this. We have to work with immigrant families and focus on them in terms of schooling the children, so make sure that their children don't leave school, that they have access to decent housing, because lots of them live in poor conditions. On the other hand, we also have to look at single parent families, and in fact, by focusing on this, we would actually resolve a large part of the childhood poverty that we have. There's another surprise factor in Europe, which is the growth of the employed poor. Families that live in poverty where both parents work. We are creating poverty even when people have jobs. Now, we have a blind faith that if we properly implemented child-raising policies and support, that this would change. Now, what clouds do we see on the horizon? Many countries, in their plans, have not included policies to attack childhood poverty, regardless of the fact that the child guarantee is being implemented by the European Parliament. There are countries that haven't taken it into account. They have no strategy to fight child poverty. And we see that that's not the way forward. Now, there are some countries that are doing, or that are making good progress. Portugal, Romania, 2 countries. Spain, well, on paper, it's good. It's committed to 6% of the Recovery Fund to this issue. But when we go to the autonomous regions in Spain, we see some differences. Some regions are not interested in looking at childhood poverty and youth poverty. And others are not even going to reach the minimum 5% threshold set by the European Union. Now, so what do? It's essential to take advantage of the childhood guarantee to make sure that we can fight childhood poverty. It's essential to have data that measure the implementation and effectiveness of different policies, and also that include best practice, so that we can use the best policies in one area in another area. We think it's essential, and this is a call to socialists and democrats in Europe, because of the leadership that they have shown in Europe. It is essential that the policies understand that childhood poverty is an anomaly and that we need to put an end to it. We have to understand in a deterministic way that poverty comes from human decisions and human factors. And if they come from that, it can be changed. And as was stated earlier, we have to understand that poor people are not at fault for their situation. We have to be sure that we understand that it's extremely difficult to escape poverty. Childhood and adolescent poverty is not natural. It's the equivalent of giving a young child a rucksack filled with bricks that they have to carry around in their lives, and we have to commit to ending this. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Andrés.
Thank you very much, Andrés. We don't have it. This isn't really a round table here. We've got a panel, but we have some great contributions here so far. And we're going to speak to Maria Rodriguez from the European Youth Forum now. You're looking at employment, social rights. In fact, your organization is looking at everything that we've been talking about today. And you are making sure that the EU does not ignore the Sustainable Development Goals.
I cannot say that Europe is doing enough or is being serious enough tackling all these issues when 1 in 4 of young people in Europe is at risk of poverty. So I honestly cannot say that the European Union is doing enough or that the countries and the governments are doing enough when the 25% of the European youth is at risk of poverty. This equals to the population of Belgium and Switzerland together, so something like the whole population of the Netherlands, for example. And this is striking, this is shocking, and we need to tackle this with public policies. The thing is that also this situation is only worsening now after in the aftermath of the COVID-19 crisis. Well, we hope we are in the aftermath now. So yeah, we need to understand as well that young people are facing a vulnerable situation because of the fact of being young. And youth is a transitional phase in life. We are facing a transition from childhood to adulthood. We are facing a transition from education to work. So we can see, for example, the compulsory step that now we all need to take, that is making an internship, most of the times even non-paid. That is something that absolutely shouldn't have a place in Europe, but also not in the world, that people are working for free. But young people are also facing this transition on living with our families and trying to live by our own. There have been already many interventions on this. So we need to understand this vulnerable phase that we are facing as young people, and that we need policies to address this particular vulnerability that we have because of being young. If we look also at the consequences that the COVID-19 crisis had on us, this poverty has only increased. There are not much numbers still on how is the impact for all the countries, but we know that 12% of young people lost their jobs. Their jobs, much more in other countries such as Spain, much more in particular regions that relied on tourism, for example, as the main job of young people. That I can imagine that the Balearic Islands were in this kind of situation. So 12% lost their jobs, and 1 in 4 had their income completely reduced, and now we face a situation in which we cannot actually have any facility to find a new job. Or we have had also to relinquish the idea of moving from the house of our parents, or we have given up of our dreams. So this is the particular situation in which young people are facing right now, and what we have seen as well as the response in the policy making, in the policies, is that, okay, many income systems have been applied all across Europe, have been implemented, but in some cases, in many cases actually, there are still some age barriers or age discriminations for young people to be actually able to benefit from these social protection systems. Or because of the fact that we have not had a job for a long time, or because of our contract only being temporary, we were not able to benefit for this social protection. So again, there is a particular discrimination that is applied for young people because of this transition phase that we are living in. And this is one of the key priorities for young people. I remember not so long ago there was a Eurobarometer survey on which are the priorities of young people for the European Year of Youth. One of that was talking about youth employment, talking about social protection for young people. But the other main topic that is one of the key demands or the key issues that young people are worried about is climate change. We all know about this. It's also because of young people, youth organizations, youth activists, school students, that this topic has been in the political agenda, and also that because, or why the European Commission has even taken this Green Deal. But we need to acknowledge that still we are not doing enough because we are not reflecting on the roots of the climate crisis. We don't only need to think on the effects of the climate crisis, we need to talk much more about the overconsumption and the overproduction. If we don't talk about this, we will still face a long process that we cannot afford. And this is a clear demand from young people to policymakers. But further than that, we need this green transition for sure, but we must not forget which is the situation in which we are living now. There is we cannot afford a green transition if it is not just, if we don't take into account the situation of the most vulnerable, if we don't take into account especially the situation of employment and social protection for young people. We need to build these resilient young people to face the green transition. And this is key for now. This is a key issue that we need to address in the policies that we are making, and this is also a key demand that we do to the policy makers in all the stages. We need to build the resilience, and we need to address, therefore, the social protection for young people and the quality employments. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, María.
Thank you, Maria. You said that in some cases people are still even working for free. There's an Italian author, Terranova, who suggests that we're even paying to be able to work in some cases. She talks about it in her book about the social factory. Would you like to say something else? Yes, it is something that's happening with the non-paid internships, or many young people who go to other cities to do an internship. They're basically paying to be able to work. This is something that should not be able to exist. Or like research within the university area. It's very important that university professors also research, but sometimes their universities say if you want to do research, then you will have to finance it yourself. We're going to talk now to Carlos Roger, who's sitting in the audience, and he had asked to say a few words at this panel. We're running a bit short of time. We have about 20 minutes before we have to end this meeting. So we would like to ask both, or all of them, Carlos, Anna, and Ivan, to please keep your interventions as short as possible. Carlos, by the way, is a member of the Equipo Europa.
Portaveu d'Equipo Europa a Illes Balears, i primer de tot m'agradaria donar les gràcies per haver comptat amb Equipo Europa en aquest acte. Está claro, todos coincidimos en que el cambio climático es un reto global que requiere...
We all know that climate change requires a common response. This is a crisis that young people have not really contributed to, but the consequences will fall on us. The last European report on climate change has revealed that more than 40% of young people in Spain are extremely concerned about climate change, which the European average is about 50%. They also qualify climate change as the second largest challenge that the world is facing. I said one of the discoverers of the ozone hole. Scientists can describe the events that will affect climate depending on their evidence, but this is not a responsibility of the scientists, but the whole society. And it is a society in which young people have a lot to say and a lot to contribute. So my question would be, how do you think that institutions can involve young people even further in the decision-making against climate change? Thank you. Thank you, Carlos. I think Agatha, by allusion, will be the one to respond to Carlos.
Thank you very much for this question, and also for raising the fact that climate crisis is a major concern for young people. And I think the answer really brings us back to what I mentioned before, which is this meaningful youth engagement. There's been a big movement, and I think a big switch in understanding the importance of youth engagement at the EU level. I mean, this year, for example, is the European Year of Youth. Some of you might have heard of this. But whilst this is certainly a step in the right direction, my concern always is, well, if we make one year the Year of Youth, then what comes next? Do we just forget about youth rights? Do we just forget about youth interests? So, I mean, ultimately, I think one of the most powerful things that we can do is to recognize young people, youth organizations that advocate for youth rights on various issues as equal stakeholders. So whenever a decision is being taken, whenever discussions are happening, young people have to be at the table. And this can translate into various processes, various specific solutions at the EU level, whether it's consulting with specific youth organizations, whether it's going through different EU bodies, for example, the European Economic and Social Committee. We've been collaborating at GC with the ESC for a while now, and one of the measures we've been taking is that any opinion that comes through the ESC, we also have an opportunity to provide input or to direct that engagement towards any youth stakeholder that's out there. And that also includes a number of events and conferences that are taking place. It's very common still, a format where you have a conference and you have various different topics being discussed, and then one of the topics is youth. Now, we are expected to, when we discuss youth, talk about the climate crisis, talk about unemployment, talk about education, talk about various different topics. But all of these issues affect young people. So instead of having a separate youth panel, ensure that in every single panel, in every single discussion that's taking place, you have a youth representative, because they are equal stakeholders. They are one of the most affected groups, and they have a right to be there. So I think this is really, really powerful and still not happening, but has a huge potential.
Thank you, Agatha. Mientras preparamos la conexión con Ana.
Thank you, Agatha. While we're preparing the connection with Anna and Ivan, who should be online, I think Maria and Andres wanted to have a contribution.
For at the European Youth Forum is a youth test at all the policies that are made at the European Union. This means an assessment on how all the policies that are being created are impacting young people, but also within this proposal, we ask for youth participation in all those policies. So we are very happy because this is part of the outcomes of the Conference of the Future of Europe, and many political groups have welcomed this proposal, and now we are presenting it to the different commissioners. So we hope that this is the legacy of the European Year of Youth.
Muchas gracias. Andrés.
Gracias. Es que si no lo digo reviento.
One of the things we need to do, or that we could do, is building a global vision in terms of climate emergency. I think in Europe, when we talk about climate emergency, we're always looking at the future, about what could happen. But we need to talk about the present. This summer, we are expecting the death of 350,000 children in Somalia. It's the hardest nutritional crisis we've seen in this decade. This is partly because of the droughts created by climate shocks, and also the rise in prices because of the war in the Ukraine, and a lot of the grains that are consumed in the Horn of Africa come from that region. So this means that only in Somalia, 350,000 children are going to die. So we need to build on this emergency immediately through a global vision, because the humanitarian community is really absolutely overwhelmed by what they're seeing happening. Yes, and we know that this is on its way, because there were 200,000 deaths already at the beginning of the last decade, between 2010 and 2011, due basically to the speculation with commodities and what their food, cereals and grains. We would like to welcome Anna Rauchenwald from Austria.
Yes, hola.
Hello, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be listening to you this afternoon.
This presidium as a vice president, but originally I'm from the Socialist Youth of Austria. And in my question, in my address, I want to pick up something that I think Andres is your name from Save the Children Spain said. So you said that poverty comes from human decisions. And when you were saying that, I was thinking, yes, I totally agree, but I want to add something, which is poverty comes from economic inequality and the way that resources are distributed systematically in our society. So there is a recent study that the world's richest persons, 2,700 billionaires, they have seen their fortunes grow more during COVID-19 that they have in the whole of the last 14 years combined. So it is the biggest annual increase since the records began. And at the same time, we're hearing there's not enough money for education, not enough money for climate programs, energy transition will be so expensive that when we demand to be paid for our internships, companies will not be able to afford it anymore. So looking at those two things, I would say that the children of Europe and the youth of Europe do suffer more from this inequality than from poverty, because it is inequality that is the core problem when their single parent goes to work every day to, I don't know, an Amazon distribution center, to a bank's office, wherever they work. And in the workplace, they are only receiving a penny from the profit that they are producing there. But inequality is not only a problem when we discuss poverty, but also when we discuss the climate catastrophe. So we know that the richest 10% account for over half of the emissions added to the atmosphere between 1990 and 2015. So the richest 1% was responsible for 15% of emissions during that time. So the richest 1%, that is more than all of the citizens of the European Union combined, and more than twice that of the poorest half of humanity. So when we are discussing this, I think it's really necessary to look at those inequalities. And I would really like to know how you think that we should address this inequality to build a fair Europe for us, for the youth generation, but also to tackle the climate catastrophe.
Thank you, Ana. Voy a pedir a María que responda a Ana.
I'm going to ask Maria to answer Anna in 1 minute.
On promoting or having active policies for employment for young people, but also increasing the skills, for example, for the green transition. That will be key, because many employments will be lost in this green transition, but also many other employments will be created. And young people are the first one that whenever we lose employment, we are out of our jobs. So we need to make sure that the new generations are trained enough for those green jobs that will be created. So yeah, that's a short reply that I can say.
Gracias, María. And finally,
thank you, Maria.
Croatia. Welcome. Be our guest, please.
Espero que me oigan claramente. El orador no está usando micrófono y se le oye muy borroso.
Sorry, I hear the interpreter. So I hope you can hear me well, and I will keep my question as short as possible. After hearing all of you from this panel and from the previous panel, are we ready for becoming a movement that is based on degrowth?
Sorry, I didn't understand very well because the connection is not good. No. Sorry, Dara?
Is the organization ready to become towards degrowth?
So, Agatha, you say this is a good question. You can answer Ivan, please.
Yes, I will try to be very, very brief. We do actually work on degrowth at GC, and this is something that I also talked about before. Addressing overconsumption is one of the degrowth policies, and I think this is incredibly important, because when we talk about solutions to the climate crisis, and when we talk about our economic system, we also need to be aware that it's not only thematic policy areas that we need to be addressing. We need to be looking at the system. And this is exactly what looking at degrowth is about. So really recognizing that the system that we're living in and the way that we're consuming and the way that we're producing resources, it's not sustainable. And I think one of the easiest ways to understand this is that you can't keep growing on a finite planet. It's just impossible. Our planet is not going to keep growing, but we are growing. And I know this is a big controversial topic, but it is gaining traction at the EU level, and there's more and more stakeholders talking about that. So I think there is a really big opportunity also to have that conversation and to readdress that elephant in the room.
Thank you, Agatha, and thank you, Anna and Ivan from Austria and from Croatia. This is the end. Es el final de la segunda mesa, del segundo panel.
We are coming to the end of this panel, and thank you very much for being here. And now you can go back to your seats. And now we would like to ask Lorenzo Bucicchi to speak a few words, to give us a short address. Lorenzo is a representative of the Progressives for Europe platform.
Was the topic I wanted to speak about, that is mental health, has already been addressed multiple times, and I'm very happy about that. My name is Lorenzo Bucicchi. I'm a Party of European Socialist activist from Italy. Italy is renowned for being a country hostile to young people, so I'm very happy to be here with you speaking about youth policies. And as I said, I wanted to speak about mental health policies in particular, because the last 4 years of my life I've been living in New Zealand. And New Zealand, in the last years, the Labour government led by Jacinta Ardern has tried to address very strongly the issue of well-being. There is a well-being budget that every year is financed by the government, and there is a lot of attention to the issue of mental health, especially concerning the issue of youth suicide. Also, I've been conducting research at the University of Waikato on the topic of mental health policies. So I would like to leave you with 5 takeaway points. Point number 1, an astonishing huge number of young Europeans suffer either of depression, either of severe anxiety. This number might even get worse because of the consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic. And it's very important to address mental health at a young age, because many mental health issues emerge in the youth, and if not cured early, they tend to chronicize. Point number 2. Fortunately, effective treatments such as cognitive behavioral therapy do exist. And point number 3, governments are still reluctant to recognize these developments, because I imagine because of the stigma that surrounds mental health. There is a tendency to leave this topic out of the public debate, beside the enormous consequences, tragic consequences that it has at the individual and collective level. Point number 4. As socialists, as European socialists, we need to be brave enough to bring this topic to the forefront of the public debate, even if sometimes it's a painful topic, even if sometimes it will be easier, more comfortable to pretend that this problem doesn't exist. We need to be brave and speak about it. And last point, in conclusion, by implementing effective evidence-based mental health policies will do something incredibly important for the well-being of young Europeans, and we will do what is ethically right to do for young Europeans. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lorenzo Bushishi from Progressive for Europe platform. La salud mental ha sido uno de los temas que ha salido también durante.
Mental health is one of the issues that have been discussed more than once, besides housing and climate change and child poverty. This is also one of the issues that needs to be taken into account for future meetings. The Minister for Foreign Affairs, José Manuel Alvarez, was supposed to be here this afternoon through an online connection, but he cannot connect with us due to agenda problems, but he wanted to be present here, so he sent us a video that we can watch now, please.
Buenas tardes, buena tarde. Enhorabuena al grupo.
Congratulations to the whole group, Alicia, Irache, Javier Moreno, the head of the Socialist delegation at the European Parliament, and Francina Armengol, president of the Balearic government, for organizing this event that gives voice to youth for building a better Europe. I would have really liked very much to be there today with you in Palma on that beautiful island, to listen to all the participants talk about these very transcendent topics for our society, for our youth: climate change, housing, mental health. And thank you also to all of you for your contributions and your commitment to the European project. On the past 9th of May, on the Day of Europe, the conclusions about the future for Europe were presented at the Parliament. It was the ending of more than a year of collecting views and opinions from all Europeans about the future. Our Spanish citizens and you, our youth, you have contributed to the success of this conference, and your voice has been heard in the final debates at the plenary. So some of the conclusions included in the final report deal with the double digital and green transition, social justice, rights and values in terms of foreign action. These issues will be a very fundamental part of the European agenda in the next few years. And all your proposals, your commitment to improve job quality, better housing, climate justice, or strengthening the youth and childhood guarantees. The Social Democrat family has always distinguished itself for acting both in Europe and around the world by promoting our values, defending democracy, liberty, social justice, Europeism, of course, and ecologism, feminism, tolerance, diversity. These are huge challenges that we have encountered over the past 2.5 years, with first the pandemic and then the invasion of the Ukraine by Putin, and they threaten the basic European values, but they have found a united Europe that defends its citizens. The Next Generation program is going to be part of the response to all these challenges that we are facing, and this has all been done by Europe. We need to keep on working to make sure that the citizens' expectations are not disappointed. That's what we will do from the Spanish government, from this ministry. It is a really difficult time that makes us rethink everything. This unjustified invasion of Ukraine by Russia, which is an unacceptable invasion, violation of a country's sovereignty, is not just a threat to the European Union. It's a threat to all principles on which the European order has been based since the Second World War. the European Union and Spain's action has been exemplary. We've taken very quick measures to help the Ukraine and putting the defense of our values and our security over economic interests and financial interests. We approved for the first time sending weapons to a third country, to a third-party country, being charged at the European budget so that that country can defend their civil society, their children, their women. And we are showing our solidarity, welcoming refugees and providing social and financial support to that population. And all this is coming from our deepest sense of alliance with our transatlantic allies. European security, which we have always been considered secure, it is not anymore. And again, it is up to us to take on the responsibility for our security. A few weeks ago, we adopted the Strategic Compass, which is a document that gives guidelines for all areas of policy in order to be able to conduct a common analysis of threats and risks. We also had the NATO summit in Madrid, which is going to be leading the European security for another decade. Probably one of the most important elements of this summit will be the dialogue between the EU and NATO. Next year, Spain will hold the presidency of the European Union, and although it is very early to foresee what's going to happen, all these things that we've been talking about, the social Europe, the strategic compass, will be part of our agenda and will be part of our main goals during our presidency. I would just like to repeat my congratulations to you for this event and this debate, and I would like to invite you to go on debating, discussing, and coming up with new proposals to build a better Europe. We, Europeans, cannot be resigned and go back to national responses at thinking small. Our way of being in the world is through Europe.
Esta ha sido la segunda intervención de un ministro.
So this was.
Como no queremos acabar con un video.
So since we don't want to end on a video, we would like to ask Javier and Alicia to come up and close the event. I'd like to thank Francois and Giovanni for having put the work in and organized this event, and it's been really easy. Thank you so much, and I just wanted to say goodbye to everybody. And we're going to give the last words to our two guests here. So first of all, I would like to say thank you to Pedro for moderating this event. I think it's worth a round of applause. And thank you all, those who have come here in person and those people online. Thank you for your commitment to the European project. And thank you for showing that it's a priority for you to grow together. And I think we've come up with some very positive conclusions. We have a committed youth here. We all know what problems we have, but we also want to implement changes. And I think that the future will be better. So Javier, what about you? First of all, thank you, Pedro, for moderating. And now I would like to thank the team who've helped and supported the event here and have really worked hard. Andres, you're right. Childhood poverty is unacceptable. And who will fight it if it's not the socialists? I know that we are active and that we will continue with this fight. And our group will always protect the rights of children. And we need you because your strength helps us. That's just a reflection that I wanted to make. And in terms of generations, mine and previous generations, we are guilty. My children tell me that we destroyed the planet because we live the lives that we led. This is why we're in the situation we're in today. Today we've mentioned the financial crisis, and we've even spoke about psychological crisis. And we've spoken about young people who feel that they have no place, that they're lost. And I think that it's true what has been said. It's an opportunity. You are a generation of hope. But as I stated in my talk, we shouldn't just talk about young people as the future. Young people are the present. You have to take part through civil society, through NGOs, and really young people, you have to come into politics. As MEPs, when we have to prepare directives, we want help from civil society, but who takes the decisions? Politicians take those decisions. But really, listen, people say that political parties have no place for young people, but look at the example I have next to me. There are places for you. Now, politics is hard. I'm not going to deny it. But it's really important that you get involved. It's really important that we have involvement from all sections of society, whether it be the civil society, whether it be NGOs. But get into politics because it will matter. Thank you very much. And after all the time we spent here, we can continue our conversations upstairs. We've got a little coffee and snacks prepared for you. Thank you very much again for coming here.
Una cosita antes de acabar. ¿Veis este cacharro? ¿Alguno de vosotros tiene este cacharro? Me piden que lo dejéis.
If anybody still has this gadget, which is probably headphones for interpretation, please leave them on your chair. Oh, sorry, leave them outside. There's a table outside where they're collecting your headphones.